I'm Andy Orm of O'Reilly Media. I'm talking today with Marcia Keene, who is the chairperson of Feinstein Keene Healthcare. They are working in the cancer space, and they have some pretty far-reaching ideas for changing the way cancer research is done. So Marcia, what kind of organizations have you pulled together on this cancer research project?
Well, thanks, Andy, for asking. The one I'd like most to talk about is called the Data Liquidity Coalition. And what this is an endeavor formed spontaneously by a group of individuals and organizations who have decided that one of the biggest obstacles to effective cancer research and improved cancer care is that data cannot move fastly in the cancer community, or in fact, within any sector of biomedicine right now. There are a lot of reasons for that. Some of them are cultural. Some of them are technical. But basically, unlike all the other sectors of our daily lives, whether it's banking or retail or airline travel, information just does not flow well in biomedicine. And we've decided enough is enough. We're going to change that.
Oh, the Institute of Medicine, I understand, started this.
Well, it's very interesting. The Institute of Medicine realized in recent years that this problem that data couldn't move in biomedicine was in fact a huge national challenge. And in February of this year, they convened a workshop of a variety of experts in the community to talk about what the dimensions of the problem were. And they invited an advisory committee, on which I was privileged to serve, to put forth a solution to this. And we wrote a paper and presented it that essentially said, what we need to do to overcome the problem is to form an ecosystem in the community that would be comprised essentially of everybody who has a stake in this. And of course, cancer is a disease that affects all of us. So when you say everyone who's affected, you really do mean all the traditional silos, whether it's patients, providers, physicians, researchers, IT people, everybody who might have a stake in making things much better. And essentially bringing biomedicine into the 21st century using IT capabilities.
Well, let's take a look at some of these constituencies you talk about and what they can bring to it. Like the physicians and the patients, they have their data from diagnoses and treatments, and what would they put into the pot?
Well, essentially, one of the most important things to research today in the world of big data is to have clinical data, just as you mentioned, on when patients were diagnosed, and then what they call longitudinal data of what happens to the patient over time. And this is massive amounts of data on millions of patients, which can, when put together with genomic discoveries, help researchers find the associations on what types of cancer will respond to what types of treatment. And if no treatments are available, help researchers to discover new ones. So that's kind of from what we'd call the clinical side. Then there's on the discovery side, absolutely massive amounts of genomic data being generated. And those quantities are mind-boggling. Now, right now, a lot of the data I just described are basically trapped inside silos. And sometimes they're trapped inside one lab, sometimes they're trapped within one institution, but they do not move fastly between these entities in such a way, between and among them, in such a way that they can be put to productive use. Now, some of the barriers to that are cultural. Some people may say, well, I'm just not going to give up those data. They're mine. Yeah. And I may want to write a paper, and I may want to get a Nobel Prize for my discovery, and I'm just not going to share. So there are the cultural issues around we don't want to share for some reason. And then even among those, and there are many of them who do want to share, there's a data exchange problem. That is, it isn't easy technically. The data are very big, they're very various, there's the combination of the variety and the volume tend to make this enormously difficult. So what the coalition wants to do is make collaborations function that will permit us to create facile interchange at what might be called the boundaries. That is, through the interface, keep things open at the interface. So we're not trying to raid buildings and steal the data out of them. We're quite happy to have people retain their data inside their four walls. as long as things are open at the interface and the data can flow among authorized people and institutions.
And also, when we were talking before, you suggested this is not just to help the researchers develop treatments, but it can be used by the patients on the other end.
That's exactly right. So if you gather enough data and then you bring the tools to analyze the data, you can produce all kinds of useful information about, for example, what happens to a patient of my age who lives outside the Boston area. What are my prospects? What are my prospects if I take this medication versus another? What would happen if I just stand pat and didn't get a treatment? What's likely to occur? And those types of data, I think, we're used to in every other part of our lives. Consumers get enormous amounts of information to make decisions. Right now, that does not exist in biomedicine. And that's true also for the physician. This could be a gateway to very important, what are called clinical decision support tools, because the physician also needs assistance because he couldn't possibly, he or she, keep all of this data in their head.
And are there analytical tools that are being used now, or do those have to be developed?
I think both. I think there are some, but I think more could certainly be developed. And part of, I think, what the coalition is trying to do is once we can liberate the data by making it facile to move around, I think what will happen is that the community starts to use it. And there will be all sorts of applications that arise and all sorts of uses that we can't a priori decide right now. There will be a flowering, I think, of creativity around this. Now, a lot of people ask, are you trying to destroy the business model of the IT industry? Absolutely not.
They would ask that, wouldn't they?
Indeed. And the answer is no, we don't want to do that because all of us have a stake in this. So I think what will happen is we're just proposing that everybody can use their own proprietary system if they wish. We advocate strongly for standards-based collection of data. But we're only looking for things to be open at the interface. And what's underneath at your particular place, that's up to you.
And there's some government initiatives like the Direct Project and so forth that would probably make it easier to exchange data.
I think that there's certainly been an attempt by the federal government to move medicine towards the digital age, and the adoption that's becoming much more widespread of EHRs, electronic health records, will be enormously helpful. But in and of itself, that will not solve the data liquidity problem, because if everybody continues to collect data in non-standards-based form and then not share it at the interface, not exchange it facilely, then we're almost back where we were before.
So you've got the format issues, the cultural issues. Setting up repositories, I suppose, will be something that you have to get people to do?
Well, a lot of entities already have data repositories. Some of them already have data warehouses, as they're called, but they're often not connected to the things they need to be connected to be most productive for research, such as biospecimen banks, such as laboratories. It's not unusual for separate computer systems to be used inside a medical center that do not permit the linkage between those things. And often they don't at all contemplate linkage to the genomic data. So it's quite a job to first conceptualize a free flow, the kind of linkage that enables you to take your ATM card and get $50 worth of money, whether you're in Ulaanbaatar or you're in Worcester. And that will take probably years to do. But what's interesting about the coalition is that the morning after the workshop I described at the Institute of Medicine, there were so many different entities that gave me a business card and said, yes, I want to be involved. My organization believes in this. And we have big IT members. We have small IT startup firms. We have providers. We have academic medical centers. We have patient groups. We have researchers, scientists, epidemiologists. There really is. And we've barely gotten this endeavor launched. It's very, very new. But what we plan to do in terms of activities, I think, is a variety of things. I think we're going to try to educate and promulgate these ideas because they're not always well known. These have been in the past sort of subjects for very technical people, and average laymen didn't try to come to grips with them. But we're also going to do projects, honest to God, hands-on, where we develop some of the IT that will enable this free exchange across the interface.
Now, you've explained before that patients can use this data. It can be very valuable in their treatment. So how do you want to get them involved?
Well, what I envision is launching a kind of dialogue within the patient advocacy community, because patients, I think, very much want to help. They are good-hearted by nature. They are highly supportive of research. And I think most of them, based on the interactions I've had, don't realize that the information about their disease is by and large not being used for research purposes. I think people would be stunned to learn that, generally speaking, it isn't. So I think patients can benefit through this national dialogue we're going to start in a few ways. One, they can take action where they are, and they can begin to say to their physicians, you know, I'd really like my information to be pushed into a place where researchers can get access to it. And I think that voice will, over time, be heard. And I think they can also act as consumers of the information and begin to use it and begin to let the coalition know what kinds of information they want and how they want it formatted and how they want it used. We live in an iPad world where people are very used to having what they want on an instantaneous basis. So I think there will be a kind of demand pull-through that will be very helpful to our efforts.
What you're talking about philosophically is similar to what I've heard from some other people, that it used to be the researchers or the funders would drive and the grant givers would drive the research, and we're asking the patients to take more control over the research.
Well, I think the empowered patient is a wonderful thing. And I see a lot of dialogue that I didn't used to see, even though I've been in the life sciences and healthcare my whole career, between pharma, researchers, and patients, as well as clinicians. And that multi-stakeholder discussion, I think, is absolutely vital for this community. And I think over time it will accelerate research and improve the productivity of research.
So you've told me that what you're trying to put together is an ecosystem of all these things, the pharma, the researchers, and so forth. And how can that be done? Well,
I think I'm not a scientist, as you can tell, but my understanding of an ecosystem is that everybody takes and everybody gives. And it's a win-win situation all around. And as we began to put together this coalition, we actually made lists saying, what is it that each constituency will be expected to give and what will they get back? And without that, I don't think it can succeed. So patients, I think, give a great deal, as we just talked about. They can give information. They can serve as advocates for the concept of data liquidity, making data move fastly. They can give their consent to physicians to have the data shared. Over time, as genomic profiling and sequencing gets cheaper and cheaper, they can volunteer to be sequenced and have that data put into the system to be used for discovery purposes. The same, I think, with the other constituencies. So when we ask for the help of the IT industry, I think this can be helpful to them too, because the more that things are being shared, the more data exchange transactions there are, the more capabilities that are needed, whether it's hardware or cloud computing or software applications. It brings a kind of vitality and momentum to the field, which has not been present before. Physicians can certainly benefit by having clinical decision support tools, because there is no way they can otherwise know everything. And this can help them talk to their patients and help the patient be part of the decision-making process. And researchers clearly need access both to genomic data, to the biosamples, and to the clinical data in order to make the best discoveries in a fast way.
What some researchers have talked about is research that builds on other data sets, and one study feeds into another because they're reusing the data and not just reading a paper.
I think that's exactly right. And it gives greater opportunities for validating someone else's discovery in close to real time, as opposed to waiting a year for a paper to be published and then de novo starting your next study and so on. So it opens up vistas also for collaboration that are currently not available to people. And in a sense, well, the counterpart of big data is big science, right? Doing things on a very large scale among large sets of people as well as large data sets. And I think that will bring life sciences into the 21st century.
Now, since we're putting up this video on O'Reilly, there may be people who understand some of the domain and want to do some coding, maybe actual programmers. Is there a role for programmers in this?
Yes, we would love to talk with the technical people because there is much to be developed in terms of the IT overlays, if you will, at the interfaces. So they can come to the website, dataliquiditycoalition.org. We will try to have a wiki built very shortly and really engage people in an ongoing community dialogue so they can participate in whatever way they feel is right for them. And I'm also happy to take phone calls if someone wants to just call and talk about it with me.
Are there new business opportunities here too?
I believe that there are. I think if some of the IT overlay capabilities get developed, they could then be embedded into people's proprietary software. I think people can think about ways in which they could serve a community that has more data liquidity. So you can imagine there were all sorts of commercial opportunities when the ATM was invented in the banking industry. I imagine there are people who build those machines, who issue the plastic cards. There are all kinds of opportunities, I think, around a world in which biomedicine functions the way every other industry functions.
And financial data needs to be monitored and cleaned up, and you have to look for fraud and stuff, and I imagine some of that will go on in this research data too.
I think the security issues are very, very important. First, there's the notion that data collected and aggregated in standards-based ways will always be more useful. And then there is a question of privacy for the patients, and that is not a small issue. It's something that has to be taken into consideration all through this, and as well as keeping the data safe and used by people for the appropriate purposes. So all of that, I think, needs to be embedded into everything we develop and promulgate.
Now, the Data Liquidity Initiative really started back in February of this year, not that long ago. Why do you think this is the right time to pull this together?
Well, you know, it's interesting. There was a time when nobody wanted to talk about the technology that was underneath any of this. There was a time when patients thought this was highly threatening, that any use of their data would potentially be dangerous to them. And where I think researchers were very busy in a mindset that was inward, what I call the one man, one microscope kind of culture. And I think all of that is changing at a very, very rapid pace, partly because of the empowered patient that we spoke of, partly because technology is so ubiquitous in our lives. And with technologies like the iPad, everybody has gotten comfortable with technology. Now, they may not understand what's inside that tablet, but they know it's delivering value to them with information that they previously couldn't access facilely. And I think that's part of it. And also, the cancer burden in this country and globally is very, very daunting. And the millions of people that are going to suffer represent a huge, huge human tragedy, as well as an economic debacle, potentially. And that's without even thinking about all the other diseases that we have to confront. So I think that the knowledge of all these things and a change of mindset makes it kind of like the planets are all aligning. And the fact that after that Institute of Medicine meeting, people grouped around and said, yes, how do we start? What do we do? Is, I think, very clear-cut evidence of it being the right time. And when we've had our first meetings, people group naturally into what they're good at. So we have a technology track, and we have an outreach to patients track, and an education track, and a discussion of privacy issues track, and everyone groups around where they feel their skill set will be most useful. And I think that's just terrific, and collectively we build this community.
There have also been some successes in collecting data from large groups of people and mining it. I think the public and the researchers can look at some of these and see that they could achieve a lot more.
There are indeed some wonderful role models right now. The Multiple Myeloma Research Foundation is one where those patients got together and created their own biobank and have reached across to the pharma industry to say, we really want to help facilitate your development of new products. The Michael J. Fox Foundation has done similar things. There are pockets of such activity, and I think what we'd like to do is make it easy so that such organizations don't have to reinvent that wheel over and over and over. But researchers, I think, absolutely benefit because their research not only gets to be faster and more productive, but they can see the impact that it's going to have on patients. And everybody knows someone who was a patient. Virtually everyone in our society has lost someone to cancer. So I think this is tremendously meaningful, and we have had people say to us, I'm a such and such, I'm not a physician, and yet I want to do something because I lost a parent or a sibling or a friend. And how can my skills be relevant? And I think it's a very big tent we're creating, and almost everyone can work within it.
Now, I know you're going to present this along with a couple of colleagues at the Strata RX conference in mid-October. Is there anything else you'd like to tell people on video now?
What I would like to do is invite people to please join us, because we can't have enough of different diverse thinking, of different sources of data, of different expressions of what would be done with the data if they were facile. So I would invite people to come to our website, dataliquiditycoalition.org, to call me, to reach out and to become a part of this. We need folks to really care about it, because at the end of the day, not only are we all potential patients, but those we love are potential patients. And this is a very special moment in time for us to address the challenge.
Wonderful. Thank you.
Thank you.